The enormity of joblessness, together with low levels of economic growth and the adverse global economic conditions, means that we are called upon to come up with a whole number of solutions. And some of those must mean that we've got to be innovative, and we must combine that with our willingness to be as creative as possible to address this crisis, because we are essentially in a deep and serious crisis.
Joblessness, as the President says, has of course reached crisis proportions in South Africa, especially if the expanded definition is also taken into account. It actually means that 10 million people in our country do not have any form of employment. The consequences are horrific at a social, family and political level. Moreover, the economy does not show any signs of improving. So what is to be done, as Lenin so eloquently put it? Economists Dr Iraj Abedian, Dr Neva Makgetla, and of course Duma Gqubule joins me this morning on The Fix to talk about what every South African is concerned about, the fact that 10 million South Africans don't have jobs. Dr. Abedian, let me flip the script a little bit, right? So a lot of conventional wisdom says the state is not really responsible for creating jobs. It must make the country investable. It must remove the red tape and so on. So let's assume that is true, hypothetically. What then should the private sector be doing to address this 10 million job crisis?
Well, that assumption that you say, let's assume is true, is completely false. The state has to create the environment, but the state should abstain from destroying the environment. Private sector cannot do anything if there is no electricity, if there is no security, if there is no policy clarity. So let's just be absolutely clear that this ideological thing is a little bit theoretical.
Okay, so on this policy thing, like you say, you're saying the ideological thing is theoretical. But in reality, Iraj, and you would have to be candid with me, the African National Congress has not pursued a left-wing economic policy. It hasn't done what other left-wing governments have done. So why are we talking about policy uncertainty? For 25 years, we know that the ANC has followed a capitalist line. So what is the policy uncertainty business is talking about?
Well, first of all, this left and right is also a theoretical, good for theoreticians.
Precisely.
But in reality, those who followed left, they failed, and those who followed right, they failed. So we need to be practical. What is policy uncertainty? When I speak of policy uncertainty, I'm saying what is our policy with respect to energy? What is our policy with respect to getting our logistics right? What is our policy getting the capable state
So
delivering?
we're not talking about an alternative way of practicing economics. We're talking about... Are you saying that?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me bring Duma in.
Yeah.
You've been advocating a different way of doing things. Many people say if you do the same thing expecting different results, it's the definition of madness.
Yes.
Are we there?
Yes, we are there. Karima, there's 10.2 million South Africans who are unemployed. The unemployment rate for black Africans is 42%. For black African females, it's 47%. In the Eastern Cape, where half of my family comes from, it's 47%. The youth unemployment rate is 68%, the expanded definition. And there is 8 million young South Africans between the ages of 15 and 34 who are not in employment, education or training, 40% of the age cohort. So whichever indicator you look at, we are in a crisis, and you can't use the conventional economic policy tools to address a crisis like that. You have to really start being innovative and use other policy interventions here.
Okay, Neva, you're an advocate of state intervention. You have long argued that this kind of crisis requires state intervention. We've had state intervention at lots of places. They've gone horribly wrong. They've been mismanaged. They've been used for cronies. And they've effectively not actually met the objectives which they are set to do. Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater?
On either side, yes. I think we would rather... I'd rather see myself as being pragmatic around this. There are cases where the private sector does much better and cases where government does better. So
give me an example.
So in the very short run, if you want to get mass job creation, you probably need to have a public works scheme. In the long term...
But we have a public works scheme.
We do.
We have an expanded public works scheme.
Yes.
Why is it not absorbing this kind of volumes that Duma has just spoken about?
Well, I think because basically government becomes very risk-averse, because part of the problem is that if they do anything that looks in the least bit radical, and by radical I don't mean left or right, but rather just large-scale
out of the box
and expensive and out of the box and innovative, you know, all the things the President talked about, there are big risks attached. And then, to be blunt, Treasury or somebody says, we can't take that risk, we'll give you a quarter of the money you had to see if it works, and then it doesn't work because it's so small that it's insignificant, and then we close it down. I would argue there are big problems with the expanded public works program, but we need to then be much more innovative in how we do it. We had a program called the Community Work Program that looked like it could really grow. We could never get the budget to expand it on a large scale. I do think there has to be a sense of saying government is inefficient, but the private sector can be highly inefficient as well. And I mean, I would refer you to Steinhoff.
Okay, so I can see Iraj is itching to get in, but I want to start with you so that I can set the question up for Iraj. If we accept that both government and the private sector are not poster boys and girls for efficiency, that profit in many cases is the bottom line, or stealing or cronyism is the bottom line, what is it that we require from these two big social role players in our society to come to the party and give South Africans something to live for, something to actually hope for?
Okay, Karima, on Tuesday it was quite an amazing day. 11:30, Stats SA comes up with the jobs announcement, the shocker jobs announcement.
Yeah.
Quarter to 1, Ace Makgetla does a report back from the ANC's 4-day NEC, and it did not address the jobs crisis. It had zero plan to get us out of...
You know, it was obsessed with Derek Hanekom.
Yeah, they spent the whole time talking about Derek Hanekom. But what I'm trying to say is there was nothing about the economic crisis. And then at 2 o'clock, we had the Eskom announcement where the government kicked the can down the road for another 18 months in terms of sorting the debt problem with Eskom. So they've put it to another committee, whereas the debt situation at Eskom is a political decision.
Yes.
There's no investment bank or corporate financer. How many other sustainability task teams consulting reports that they're sitting on, and they still can't make a decision on this issue. So we need a plan to get our economy out of this. Now, unfortunately, in the short term, there are only 3 tools that you can use to stimulate an economy.
Okay.
There's a monetary stimulus, lower interest rates, a fiscal stimulus, and more government spending, and also a lower exchange rate, but with the inflation targeting central bank, that becomes a bit of a lower exchange rate. Sorry, with the inflation targeting central bank, it becomes a bit of a problem. Yeah.
Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Do you agree there's only 3 tools that we can use?
No, it's much more.
Tell us.
The issue, job creation, through a macroeconomic stimulus, as Duma mentioned, that's part of the jigsaw puzzle. There's no question about it. But that's not where the major action is. The major action has to be what sectors of the economy are capable of creating jobs. Then I would like to sit, the president literally has to drop every nonsense that he is busy with, because this is a national priority. Get sector by sector, agriculture, tourism, mining, manufacturing, etc., etc. Sit them in the room with himself and with his top guns in a room until they come up with a solution saying, we commit to this, this is what is possible here. If you do that, this is what we will do. Not these statements of intention and concern and all that nonsense that we keep hearing about. This is not how the economy grows. This is not how jobs are created.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because this is obviously the massive debate in the country. I want to refer to the Piro cartoon, which hopefully we're going to see up on the screen. It's you know, a parody on what the future holds for youngsters who are at school, and it says, what would you like to be, a scientist, a tech, and so on? And you know, one little chap says employed. Neva, the fact that people are so desperate to be employed, those with skills, those without skills, why are they not being employed, particularly in those sectors that Iraj has mentioned? Because often when we speak about unemployment, we speak about these things in very general terms. Let's break it down to sectors. So let's go, for example, to tourism. That's meant to be low-hanging fruits, right? We've got some of the world's heritage sites here. We've got a history that is really interesting. And the tourism minister had to go on telly and say, we beg tourists to come, you're going to be safe in the country, etc., etc. Why is the service industry not able to be a quick turnaround?
Look, I think the one thing I would disagree with my colleagues about is this, which is I think we need to be more clear that the unemployment rate is very subjective because it just looks at who is looking for work. But if you look at the share of the working age population with employment, it's only slightly better now than it was in '94. The big unemployment crisis happened in the '80s because what happened was apartheid was designed to create cheap labor for the mines and farms, and the mines and farms started shedding labor. To change that, you need to change the structure of the economy. So what's wrong with tourism? I would argue that the mishandling of the border crisis in Cape Town, you can see since then there's been a bit of a slowdown. But there's also a global slowdown. The economy, from 2002 to 2011, we had a commodity boom. Our export prices were very high. It was easy to look like we were making progress. Since then, and particularly since 2015, growth has been very slow and precarious and much affected by droughts, which in turn reflect climate change. We need to look also at those structural changes, structural challenges. So I think Duma is completely right. In the short term, there are limited things you can do. I mean, I think both people are right here, that we need to say, how do we make government more responsive to business, which is easy to say, but let me just say, hard to do. When business is in a highly unequal society, nobody wants us just doing handouts for business. So unless business also comes back and says, this is what we can provide, it's very hard to provide the kind of support for business you see in other countries. But it's also true that in the last 3 years, a lot of the slowdown is around fiscal austerity. You know, and if we can't figure out how to come up with a counter-cyclical fiscal policy, I don't see how you can grow jobs.
Duma, you've been a great critic of the Reserve Bank's approach to austerity. You putting an alternative on the table. But I don't want you to do it in coded economic language.
Yes.
I want the chap who is sitting and deciding where do I put my 20,000 rand, or the local hairdresser that is suffering because she's not getting water from the municipality in Umfuleni, for example. How does your counter-argument help those people?
Okay, so let me just explain it. So when we talk austerity, we're talking fiscal policy. So you look at government spending. So if you look at public sector, if you look at investment over 2015, 2018, the last 4 years, the major reason for the slump in investment spending is because of the public sector. So state-owned enterprises down 26% over that period, and general government down 18%. So this is so the government has been the main reason for the collapse in investment. So they have to reverse that, yeah. So
how do they do that so that my hairdresser can have her water and my guy who's got 20,000 rand to invest makes a decision that South Africa is actually a better bet than, let's say, Mauritius or some other place?
Okay, so the thing is, we have to sort out the balance sheets of these state-owned enterprises. I think it was very naive for them to think that we just put a new board and things are going to sort themselves out. So I've done some analysis. The debt of these state-owned enterprises, the largest ones, is about 700 billion, and about 440 is Eskom, about 122 is Transnet, and then there's Sunral, SAA, and a few others. So let's just find a solution very quickly to sort out the debt problems so that they can start doing more investing in the economy.
How do we sort out the debt problem, Iraj?
Be open about it and not kick the can down the road.
Or do we lance the boil?
The issue is to deal with it, not to procrastinate it. We haven't dealt with it. We got to say 700 billion. On the debt side of the state, what is on the balance sheet of this, on the asset side.
Yeah.
And there are pockets of assets that should not be sold. Let me just be absolutely clear.
Give an example.
For example, government is sitting on, my estimate, about 250 billion of properties, which is mismanaged and left to degenerate. Somebody has got to say, this asset, how do we leverage that? That's 250 billion of your 700 billion.
Yeah.
Then there got to be a commitment, not write off or final. If you give me an energy policy which is viable and financeable, against it, I can raise money for you.
Yeah.
But don't tell me that we will appoint a chief restructuring officer. We don't know who it is. It's part-time, and has got nothing to do with what needed the economy needs. For example, in the energy sector, which is the weakest link of our economy, there is, again, I've done the work, happy to share it in the public, about 250,000 jobs to be created. But it requires DTI, IDC, government making a decision, creating the environment, policy clarity, to then generate the balance sheet against which you can borrow credibly and restructure the energy sector, as part of which part of Eskom's debt will be sorted out.
Now, if you look at what the president has done, he's put the energy minister, the public enterprises minister, and the trade and industry minister in one room to try and do that. People are quite territorial. Karima has already gone around saying nuclear has to be part of it because, you know, from a base point of view, you can't do something else. We've been told nuclear is so expensive we can't afford it. The fact that these three ministers are now in the same room, Iraj, what is preventing them from getting to your number of jobs that can be created? And for our viewers' sake, repeat how many jobs can be created in the energy sector.
250,000 that I'm prepared to back it up and show the result. But it requires a different type of modus operandi. Three ministers that none of them knows anything about the sector, because they're ministers. They've got no knowledge of the technical work that needs to be done. They have no knowledge of financing options.
But if they bring in consultants, we complain about that as well, because we say we can't spend expensive monies on people that they don't know. But these are politicians that don't know anything about these things.
Karima, I'm not suggesting they must bring consultants. There is no need for consultants. What I'm suggesting is already on the books and in the corridors of IDC, there is. It just requires a different way of urgency and the operations of the cabinet.
Neva Makgetla, you have worked inside and outside government. You've worked in government think tanks. You've been in the Ministry of Economic Development when it just started. You are now at TIPS. What is it that prevents these ministers from making those very practical decisions? What is it that they are so tied to that prevents them from what one would assume would be common sense?
Okay, well, firstly, it's not such common sense. So part of the problem is any strong policy goes against vested interests, and particularly in business. And I would argue one of the core problems with government is actually we need a much more strategic approach to big business that says these are not our friends. They're also not our enemies. They are what they are. We need to give them what Iraj says, give them what they need so that they do what we want. You know, that when they maximize profits, they're creating jobs. And we need to say, how do we get to that point? Part of the problem, however, has tended to be that in a very divided society, these answers are not so simple. So I can guarantee that if, you know, what you're saying, there are divisions. Those divisions are based not on, you know, I'm not saying they're corrupt, but on who you talk to, whose ideas you hear, who you hear in the corridors, who you engage
Who's
with.
made secret deals that haven't even declared, which is why they're pursuing certain policies.
But often it's not even that.
Yeah.
Often it's just, you know, we're in trade industry, we talk to manufacturers. We're in mining, we talk to mining companies. We're in energy, we talk to Eskom. And that's where we get our information, and that's where the consultants actually can be useful.
I want to share a tweet with you guys, just to take the kind of seriousness of what we're saying into what is actually tragically hilarious. Just have a look at the tweet that is on the screen. It says, tomorrow just wake up, wear your informal clothes, go to any company and start working. If they call the police, go to the police station and start working there too. Duma, are you advising young people to do just that?
I think they don't have an option at the moment. It's actually, I don't even know where to start. But we have to, I'm talking about what they were saying, let's say we agree that we have to have this fiscal stimulus. Now, there are very many ways of doing it creatively. Yes. It doesn't have to all appear on the government's balance sheet. It can happen off the government's balance sheet. So once we get everybody in the room, we can find a way of financing the stimulus. So he's saying he needs an energy policy to be right and to unlock money. So let's just do that. But what worries me is that after so long, we still don't have a plan to get us out of this crisis. That is really worrying. And the last thing I want to say is that I heard the president blaming the global financial crisis. This has got nothing to do with the global financial crisis.
Externalities is always a nice crutch to lean on. Neva, you wanted to come in.
No, I think the problem is not that we don't have a plan. We have many plans. We need to find some way to say, how do we agree on a few big measures and take those forward? And to be blunt, I don't mean something like the Job Summit where you're looking at projects. I mean saying, what are the systemic roots of joblessness in South Africa that makes us have the highest rate of joblessness in the world? If you look at the share of the working age population with a job. And that's been true for 50 years. How do we change that?
Iraj, here's a scenario I want to sketch for you, right? We saw this week 2 massive protests, one in Tshwane, our administrative capital, and one in Johannesburg. The Tshwane one was municipal workers saying that they are not happy with senior managers getting 18% of an increase. And in the city, we had small businesses that were actually not waiting for government handouts, but creating jobs, selling goods, feeding their families, being attacked by the police on the pretext of looking for illegal goods. Now, obviously, we have to look for illegal goods, but we also know Mayor Herman Mashaba has often made statements that have xenophobic undertones, so much so that the Human Rights Commission actually called him in. And we saw the diaspora community responding, saying, why are you taking our ability to feed our families away? If we're talking about small business development, is what the city of Johannesburg did the right thing? A friend of mine who goes to Pretoria every day, to Tshwane every day, said what someone did was literally remove slabs of concrete from the streets in the city to try and block traffic and so on. And it's going to cost thousands of rands to replace it, right? And the people in the downtown city were labeled immigrants. In fact, the Sowetan ran a headline that says, cops run from foreigners. Now, that's xenophobic. It is anti-small business. It is anti-people actually trying to make a living. Is that what we should be doing?
Absolutely not. To the best of my understanding, that was not a project of City of Johannesburg. Let's get that right. That is police following with the brand owners, which is a national competency, dealing with the illegal, illicit flow. So let's just get...
But did they have to go about it like that? I mean, surely these people have, associations which you meet with. You don't just go in with a Nyala and start rounding people up.
So the answer to your question, is this the way we want to, is that how we want to brand South Africa for a new dawn, for a new investment destination? Absolutely not. So we cannot polarize these false dichotomies. That is, you're either xenophobic or you're that. No, we got to get the country right in terms of legality. Create the legal environment in which foreigners, local businesses can create jobs legitimately and support them, never mind fighting with them. But if they are part and parcel of a network of undermining local production, putting at jeopardy jobs, then we have to also deal with it legally and openly, not brutally. We cannot cultivate a culture of violence and expect to be headline globally, say South Africa is a place to go be safe and invest.
Okay, we've got 3 more minutes left for the segment, sadly. I want closing comments from you. Let me start with you, Duma, on your to-do list for the President. Beyond those 3 measures that you were saying, and let's talk the way people would understand. People who own small businesses, people who are looking for jobs, what should be done?
Okay, we have to think innovatively as to how to do the stimulus. I think there shouldn't be a debate as to how to do the stimulus. Let me just give you an example. You asked about the central bank. Central banks throughout the world have got what is called developmental windows. You have it in the Bank of England, you have it in the what you call it, the European Central Bank and the People's Bank of China. So where you give money at low rates to the banks to on-lend to small businesses or infrastructure projects or to finance the development, finance institutions. So that is just one of the things that we should start looking at. There are so many others that we can do.
Neva?
I think we need to say what he said himself. We need to prioritize job creation and a more equitable economy, and we need to do it both through a counter-cyclical macroeconomic policy, both fiscal and monetary, and I agree with Duma entirely. There are many, many innovative ways to do it so that you could not, because there are budget constraints, but there's resources off the budget. But also what Siraj was saying, which is we need to say, how do we restructure the economy, both in terms of supporting small business, but also in terms of supporting key industries, so that we change the structural problem we inherited from
Give
apartheid.
me the perfect soundbite, Iraj, in 40 seconds.
40 seconds, create a national war room. Bring in all those who argue against, lock them in a room. It cannot be that Duma is right and governor is also right. Both of them got to, and they're both intelligent, and I trust both of them will get to a solution. Lock them in a room and say, what is good for South Africa? Bring businesses, not talking like loudspeakers across the room, in one room. What do you need tomorrow morning, Monday morning, you do what you want and I'll do what I want, and these are the jobs that we will monitor. That is the level of priority.
Thank you so very much for this discussion. Of course, there's much more to discuss. Duma Gqubule, Neva Makgetla, and Iraj Abedian. Still ahead on The Fix, we look at the top stories in the weekend newspapers. Stay with us.